on that end. So I'm going to go to our Zoom recording. I'm going to hit share. I need to make sure because they're see Zoom recording. I'm going to hit share. I need to make sure because they're uh, the thing that I hope we realize is that each and every one of us can sit in the same place. And in social psychology, we're going to watch how everybody can act the same way, can behave the same way, but have a different reason based upon the sensations and perceptions that they're having. Okay, so here we go with let's start with some definitions. Sensation is the process of receiving information. So with our visual system, it's visual wavelength. With our auditory system, they're auditory wavelength. With pain and pleasure, they're pressure. Okay? But perception is a process of organizing and interpreting that information. And it is always based upon what information our brain has on our past. Okay? And I'll bring up a simple explanation. So, someone who is, let's say, more physical versus someone who is not physical. That person who is more physical is probably not going to experience the physical pains of sensation as much as that person who does not. Okay. Then we need to introduce the idea of transduction. This is the relation related to the sensation process of transforming that physical energy that we are experiencing as a sentient sensation being and transforming it into electrical chemical information that is sent to our brain for physical transformation for us to experience. So we talked at the beginning of this class about many philosophical questions that we were trying to explore. The idea of sensation and perceptions um, with philosophical questions is if a tree falls in the woods and no one is around, does that physical thing happen? Does a tree, for example, so I'm imagining most of us are here in the United States based upon what I read on the introductory apps, or introductory uh, things, okay? And so most of us are here. Some of you are here from Alaska. I think one of you are from Hawaii. I can't remember which one, I'm sorry. But um, most of us probably don't have a sensory experience of a tree falling in Russia or China or Israel or anything else. So, does that exist? Do those things exist? They exist in the imagination because I brought up Israel as a good example. Because Israel right now and Gaza Strip is in the news media all the time. It's informational. It's may not directly impact our sensory inputs. But here we have the situation that has nothing to do with our sensory inputs, but it does indeed impact our reality of the world. So the idea of a tree falling where no one can hear it, does it impact our sensations or our perceptions? And that's something that is so intriguing, right? And that's why most philosophers, most scientists, most uh, individuals who are promoting this say that sensations, what you actually experience, has nothing to do with the perceptions that you have. Because your perceptions, as we will learn through this class, are loaded with both bias, but with love, with I belong, but I don't belong. And so this is the point of this section. We've went through the biology section and we have shown there are certain areas of the brain that respond and seem to process information based upon our experience. But now we are really looking at how does our brain, if you want to put it in that terms, if you want to put it in the terms non materialistic, how does our mind transfer that information into our reality and what we experience? And this is going to be the hard part about breaking prejudice and bias, but also breaking tradition. Okay. So I want to start with this video. This is a cool because it's a very good transitional video between what it's meant to have a sensation, what we see and experience, our perception. So we're going to go through this video. I hope you enjoy it. Let's see how it goes. Hey, class, I'm trying to fix the audio. Let me know if you can hear this.
We're going to talk about a new lecture just for TED, and I'm going to show you some illusions that we've created for TED, and I'm going to try and relate this to happiness. And what I was thinking about with happiness is what gives happiness, or happiness which I equate with joy, in my particular area. And I think there's something very fundamental, and I was thinking about this. And it's in terms of both illusions and movies that we go see and jokes and magic shows, is that there's something about these things where our expectations are violated in some sort of pleasing way. You go see a movie and it has an unexpected twist, something that you didn't expect, and you find a joyful experience. You look at the sort of illusions in my book and it's not as what you'd expect, and there's something joyful about it. And it's the same thing with jokes and all these sort of things. So what I'm going to try and do in my lecture is go a little bit further and see if I can violate your expectations in a pleasing way. I mean, sometimes expectations that are violated are not pleasant, but I'm going to try to do it in a pleasant way, in a very primal way, so I can make the audience here happy. So I'm going to show you some ways that we can violate your expectations. First of all, I want to show you a particular illusion here. I want you, first of all, when it pops up on the screen, to notice that the two holes are perpendicular to each other. These are all perceptual tricks. These are real objects that I'm going to show you. Now, I'm going to show you how it was done. I've looped the film here so you can get a very interesting experience. I want you to see how this illusion is constructed, and it's going to rotate, so you see that it's an inside-out thing. Now watch as it rotates back, how quickly your perception snaps. Okay, now watch it as it rotates back again, and this is a very bright audience. All right, see if you can stop it from happening, even though you know 100% it's true. Bang, you can't undo it. What does that tell you about yourselves? We're going to do it again. No doubt about it. See if you can stop it from happening. No, it's difficult. And we can violate your expectations in a whole variety of ways about representation, about shape, about color, and so forth, and it's very primal. And it's an interesting question to ponder why these things, we find these things joyful. Why would we find that joyful? So here's something that Lionel did a while ago. I like these sort of little things like this. Again, this is not an optical trick. This is what you would see. In other words, it's not a camera cut. It's a perceptual trick. Okay, we can violate your expectations about shape.
How does that work?
We can violate your expectations on representation, what an image represents. What do you see here? How many of you here see dolphins?
Okay, this is a class experiment. In the chat, how many see dolphins? Put it in the chat. Yes, no. How many see dolphins? No, 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 no. This class, I mean, Monday, Wednesday, you guys are perverts. Okay, let's see what the person says.
Raise your hand if you see dolphins. Okay, those people who have raised their hands afterwards, the rest of the audience, go talk to them. All right? Actually, this is the best example of priming by experience that I know. If you are a child under the age of 10 who haven't been ruined yet, you will look at this image and see dolphins. Now, some of you adults here are saying, what dolphins, what dolphins? But in fact, if you reverse the figure ground, in other words, the dark areas here, I forgot to ask for a pointer, but if you reverse, you'll see a whole series of little dolphins. By the way, if you're also a student at Caltech, they tend also to just see the dolphins. It is based on experience. Now, something like this can be used, because this is, after all, a talk about design too. This was done by Saatchi and Saatchi, and they actually got away with this ad in Australia. So if you look at this ad for a beer, all those people are in sort of provocative positions, but they got it passed and actually won the Clio Awards. So it's funny how you can do these things. Remember that sort of... This is a joke I did, all right? When the Florida ballot was going around, you know, count the dots for Gore, count the dots for Bush, count them again. You can violate your expectations about experience. Here is an outside water fountain that I created with some friends of mine, but you can stop the water in drops and then actually make all the drops levitate. So this is something that we're building for, you know, amusement parks and that kind of stuff. Now let's take a static image. Can you see this? Do you see the middle section moving down and the outer sections moving up? It's completely static. It's a static image. How many people see this illusion? But it's completely static. All right, now it's interesting that when we look at an image, we see, you know, color, depth, texture, and you can look at this whole scene and analyze it. You can see the woman is in closer than the wall and so forth, but the whole thing is actually flat. It's painted, it's trompe-l'oeil. And it was such a good trompe-l'oeil that people got irritated when they tried to talk to the woman, and she wouldn't respond. Now, you can make design mistakes, like this building in New York, so that when you...
All right, class, this is where I do need to make a pause in this video, because if you look at this building in New York, it looks like whoops.
Looks like the balconies.
Okay, it looks like the balconies are tilting down on one end and tilting up on the other. This is an architectural mistake. If you go out on a balcony on a multi-level building, you will notice that they slope. Most people think that they slope because that gives away from rainfall, it gives away from everything else, but it's a perceptual thing. And that the reason why in multiple things is if they did not slope those buildings, this is what you would see. But if you went out on them, either side, they would be perfectly flat. They would be perfectly like what you would expect them to. So on this level, clear up here, and is this region right here or this region right here. Let's say you were staying the night there. You would go out on that slope and you would see it as perfectly flat. But if you were at the ground level, it would look like it's sloping. And that's why engineers do that. If you go out on multi-level places, it looks like it's sloping like that. They did that for a perceptual reason, not because of the rain or anything else. So I just wanted to bring that up, that perception, reality versus perception is not always accurate. Okay, let's watch the rest of this.
Tilt up, and when you walk around to the other side and look, it looks like the balconies go down. So there are cases where you have mistakes in design that incorporate illusions. Or you take this particular unretouched photograph. Now, interestingly enough, I get a lot of emails from people who say, is there any perceptual difference between males and females? And I really say no. I mean, women can navigate through the world just as well as males can. And why wouldn't they? However, this is the one illusion that women can consistently do better than males in matching which head, because they rely on fashion cues. They can match the hat. Okay, now getting to a part, I want to show design in illusions. I believe that the first example of illusions being used purposely was by Da Vinci in this anamorphic image of an eye, so that when you saw from one little angle was like this. And this little technique got popular in the 16th century, the 17th century, to disguise hidden meanings, where you could flip the image and see it from one little point of view like this. So these are early incorporations of illusions, brought to its sort of high point with Hans Holbein's ambassadors. Hans Holbein worked for Henry VIII. This was hung on a wall where you walked down from a stair and you could see this hidden skull. All right, now I'm going to show you some designers who work with illusions to give that element of surprise. One of my favorite is Scott Kim. I worked with Scott to create some illusions for TED that I hope you will enjoy. We have one here on TED and happiness. Okay, now, Arthur hasn't talked yet, but his is going to be a delightful talk. And he has some of his really fantastic machines outside. And so Scott created this wonderful tribute to Arthur Ganson. Well, there's analog and digital. Thought that was appropriate here. And figure goes to ground. And for the musicians, And of course, since happiness, we want joy to the world. Now, another great designer, he's very well known in Japan, Shigeo Fukuda, all right? And he just builds some fantastic things. This is simply amazing. This is a pile of junk that when you view it from one particular angle, you see its reflection in the mirror as a perfect piano. Pianist. Transforms to a violinist. This is really wild. This is an assemblage of forks, knives, and spoons and various cutlery welded together. This is an assemblage of forks, knives, and spoons and various cutlery welded together. Look at a shadow of a motorcycle. You learn something in the sort of thing that I do, which is there are people out there with a lot of time on their hands. Ken Knowlton does wonderful composite images, like creating Jacques Cousteau out of seashells, unretouched seashells, but just by rearranging them. He did Einstein out of dice, because after all, Einstein said God does not play dice with the universe. Bert Herzog out of unretouched keyboards. Will Short's crossword puzzle. John Cedarquist does these wonderful trompe-l'oeil cabins. Now I'm going to skip ahead because I'm sort of running ahead. I want to show you quickly what I've created, some new type of illusions. I've done something with taking the Pixar type illusions. So you see these kids that are the same size here, running down the hall.
Okay, I just want to rewind just for a second and just tell you about perception. These two images, okay, if I were to measure them from top to bottom, these two images are the exact same size. So if this red line equals this red line, but perceptually we think this guy is smaller than this one. But let's go on because it's much more complicated than that. Let's go. Okay, you see. Okay. And then we're going to fast forward.
They are. So if you measured them, they would be.
These two tables. What the heck?
running down the hall. The two tabletop.
Okay. These two tabletops, if you were to do the same measurement that we did with the two kiddos, these two tabletops are the exact same measurement. Even though this one looks more square and this looks more rectangular, they're the same exact size and shape. So let's go on. Sorry about that.
I've done something with taking the Pixar type.
Okay, okay. We'll finish with that example later. Let's go on. And so the thing that I'm hoping that you guys realize is that there is differences between what we sense in the world, the physical energy that comes into us, and what we create as our reality, which is perception. And so I want to bring up a topic that is called priming or subliminal stimulation. So in the 70s and 80s, there was a big debate. Can we influence people's buying behavior by putting subliminal messages just below the level of awareness, where people um, experience things, but they're not aware of it? And does that increase their buying behavior? So we're gonna get into this. I'm gonna bring up this what's called a priming effect relationship with perception and reality. Okay. So this is a research that I actually did as an undergraduate. And so we had people come into the lab and they were only going to participate in whether or not a story created physical um, ability. Okay. So what we did is we had them come in and we randomly assigned to a story about inner city living or a story about um, living in the great outdoors in the rural America. So those were the two dyadics. And so the second part of this experiment was the bogus part, is that we had them run around a circle and we said we just measuring whether or not rural stories or intercity stories motivated physical interaction. The bogus, so the real part of the experiment stated in the next part is that we said, hey, since you're here, and it'll only take about 10-15 minutes, can you participate in this second experiment? And so what we did in the second experiment is most said, yeah, sure, I'll get that, because they got participation points for being a part of an experiment, blah, blah, blah. And so what we did is we showed them this picture. Okay, if we analyze this picture, there's a couple bricks. I think there's a white dude. There's a fire. There's all of these different areas. And so we said, okay, we um, gave this picture for less than 1 second. That's all they saw this picture, is 1 second they saw this picture. And then we simply asked, what did you see? And the majority of people who saw intercity, learned about intercity stuff, they pictured all of these individuals as black. You know, in those movies where there's those barrels with fire coming out of them in inner city, this was a barrel with fire coming out of it. This coffee cup that this person is, that was a gun to many of the participants. No one saw the dog that is in this little left corner. No one saw, and all of them were wearing hoodies. Okay. However, if we showed the picture of to those who did the rural area, they saw the dog. They saw this was a campfire. They accurately identified this person as white, holding accurately a mug. And they perceived everything more accurate. No one was wearing hoods. No one held a gun. No one held any of those things. And this is the power of perception. Both of those individuals saw the same picture, the same sensation hitting the back of the eye and receptor signals going to the back of the eye and sending it to the occipital lobe. But based upon the previous experience of those individuals, they both saw something completely different from each other. Okay. And so, where is more of this research? Okay. Let's look at, for example, moral identity. In 2018, this research was done to see if how you identify as a moral individual actually influences your moral behavior. Okay, so at the beginning of the semester, there was an unrelated experiment where this person came in and said, we just want to measure your moral fortitude, whether or not you're strongly moral, that, people should be married before they have sex, they should be consummated, clear up to the family unit as the moral basis of human capacity. And that if you were faced in a moral dilemma, would you use those morals that you've developed to help that individual, even if they were different from you? Okay, so this is the beginning of the semester. And there's people who are measured high in moral fortitude, saying, yes, I don't care if they're different from me. Morals matter. And there were people who measured low, who said, hey, morals are morals. They're adjustable based on the situation. So that's the measure of moral fortitude that we're dealing with in 2018. So then later in the semester, again in an unrelated psychological experiment, this person invited those individuals to, hey, you need more credit for your class. You come participate in this experiment. There were two conditions in the experiment. Okay, in both in both conditions, you were allowed to cheat. Okay. So I want you to imagine you come into this and you're offered money based upon your score. And um, based upon what the computer said and what you said, and what you said would be more powerful than what the computer said. Okay. So in this experiment, no matter what condition you were in, the computer would always score less than what you came up with. So this is the moral dilemma in this situation. Would you cheat and say the computer lied, and I came up with a higher number, and that's the actual number? Or would you say, or would you do the moral condition and say, there's some contradictions? No, I scored less than what the computer said and whatnot. This is the moral dilemma. Would you cheat for more money, or would you be honest and say, I was wrong? Maybe my calculations are wrong based on what the computer came up with. That's the moral dilemma. Okay. But before this game that they had these people played, they had individuals read innocuous situations where someone did something morally right or someone did morally wrong. Okay. And so in the morally right situation, it was simply um, an innocuous, unrelated situation where a person acted virtuous and acted in the right manner according to those standards that make us truthful and honorable. In the other situation, they were at, they just gave an innocuous situation where the person, they didn't do anything morally wrong or right. They just did a situation. Okay. So, what were the results? And this is going to, I hope, surprise everyone in this classroom. Is the people who were high in moral virtue or low in moral virtue, that had nothing to do with the results. If you believe that you are a highly moral person or lowly moral person, the results of this experiment would have not mattered to you, because the people who just read the innocuous situation and then they went through that moral dilemma, whether they scored high on moral fortitude or low on moral fortitude, they all scored the same. They all cheated. They all, most, not all, I should correct that. About 75% said that 75% of those people in that condition, whether they measured high in moral fortitude or low in moral fortitude in that situation, acted immorally. They acted not against their moral attitude about you shouldn't cheat people, but should gain value. All right. And in the other situation where individuals read a story about being morally virtue, not all, but most of the individuals, whether they scored high in moral virtue or low in moral virtue, they all said the computer was wrong. They all, not all, I'm sorry, I'm using the word all. Most, meaning greater than 50%, said, hey, the computer said this was my result. And this is what we're going to get into this class when it comes to sensation and perceptions, is that our perceptions of reality do not always match our sensations of reality. Everyone in this experiment, going back to the campfire experiment, saw the same thing that you're seeing on your video screen here. In the moral dilemma experiment, they all went through the same video game where they could lie or they could tell the truth. but based upon the situation and the stimulation that they had, they didn't all, but the majority made the assumption that based on my perceptions in the past, this is what my reality is today. Okay. And so when we get into these conversations about abnormal psychology, when we get into these conversations about why do people engage in wrong behavior, remember this conversation that based upon what we experienced just very recently determines our behavior right now. And this is what is called the priming effect. That previous experiences within our day influence what we see right now. And it's a very important and powerful tool that we should all consider. Okay. All right. What time are we getting to right now? Okay, we're all right. All right, gang, we're actually getting close to time right now. So I think what we'll get into this coming Wednesday is a science called psychophysics. Because if there's something that can be scientifically based in psychology, is things such as reaction time and inference and what we can see. And that is the study of psychophysics. And so I'm going to stop the recording right now. I'm going to stop the sharing.